Hey you guys, welcome to today's video. So today we're going to be talking about Lilith, and many of you may have never heard of Lilith. If you're watching this, maybe you have and you're just wanting to learn more about her, so you're in the right place. Lilith is a really powerful archetype for us as women to learn about and to tune into, and both her and Eve, as in Adam and Eve, they are both extremely powerful archetypes for women and are guides for us. So we're going to be looking at that today. And I think most people don't know about Lilith. I didn't know about Lilith until a few years ago because she's hidden from a lot of the stories in Christianity. And she's actually told more, there's more talk about her in the Jewish lineage. And so who is Lilith? Lilith is the first wife of Adam. So we're going back to the creation story of Adam and Eve, which I believe was written around 1000 BC. So it's not actually that old. If you've done some of my other masterclasses like Return to Goddess, where we learn about the shift from matriarchy to patriarchy, you know that around 3000 BC is when the patriarchy started to come into power. So 1000 BC is not very long ago in comparison with all of the history we have in time. So to say that that's a creation myth, it's not very old. However, it's the basis of a lot of different biblical texts. And so no matter what your religion is, I'm sure that you have heard of Adam and Eve. This story has completely shaped Western culture, whether you're of that religion or not. Whether you believe it or not, it has shaped aspects of you. So, and it definitely of the society that we live in. So, who is Lilith? Lilith was the first wife of Adam. So in Genesis, they talk about Adam being born of the dust and Eve being born of Adam's rib, which just, to me, raises a huge red flag. I'm just going to caveat real quick. I've been very averse to the Bible since I was a young child. I always felt like something was missing, which was the feminine. And I didn't want to go to church. And I told my parents I wasn't going to go anymore, and we stopped going. And something about all of these different stories just always struck me as like something big is missing here. And this feels like a big fat lie to me. So I've recently, because I'm studying so much around this and teaching a lot on it, learning about the Bible and learning about Christianity and these different patriarchal religions is key to understanding what actually happened, because the Catholic Church is the patriarchy, and it was very different a couple thousand years ago than it is today. But in starting to read the Bible, I'm just like, how have people read this? And so in the Genesis story, they say Eve is born of Adam's rib. And to me, this is just a big question mark. Why would she be born of his rib, but Adam is born of the earth? Because what that implies is that man is superior to woman, which is obviously what was believed for thousands of years. But my question is, today when people are reading this, today when people are talking about this in church, why is that still told as if that's accurate? So Lilith was Adam's first wife, and this is talked about more, I believe, in the Jewish biblical texts and their creation story, and Lilith was cast out as a demon, so I'll get to that in a second. So Lilith was Adam's first wife. They were both born of the earth. They were both born of dust, to be specific, and they lived in the Garden of Eden. And basically, Lilith was said to be a high priestess of Inanna. So this is sort of combining different stories at this point. But in the sexual temples of the goddess, well, let's just start with this. In the ancient feminine lineages, Sexual energy was way different than we see it today. Today, it's sort of like all over the place, like in 2022, it's all over the place, but it's also, there's still like shame attached to it. There's still a lot of trauma attached to it. There's, especially if you go back like 50 years, it's like, don't show anything. Don't like, you're either a whore or you're like a prude, or, you know, there's a lot of negative energy attached to sex and a lot of energy of repression specifically. And that's something that the church brought in. That's another video I'll talk about. But the goddess temples saw sexual energy as being incredibly sacred, as being creative life force. I mean, our sexual energy literally is life force. And they were working with it in a much more powerful and potent way than we are today. So in these temples, it was the goddess would often be on top in sexual acts. So it's said in the story of Adam and Lilith that she started to get frustrated because he would only have sex with her in the missionary style. She was like, this isn't gonna work for me. I wanna also be on top. This doesn't seem fair that like he's trying to force me to be submissive, and I don't always wanna be in that role. And so she talked to God about it, or she talked to angels who talked to God about it. And basically they said, this is how things are. You can either choose to, there were all these stipulations that I don't feel are really important to go into. Also, I don't know them. But basically she was cast out of the Garden of Eden. Here's something that's also interesting. So in the stories, they say she was cast out, but she willingly left. And this is something that happens in myths quite often. There will be like little twists of words in the story that make the woman seem more passive, or make the woman seem the victim. But Lilith left herself. She went to the Red Sea, and the Red Sea is popular in terms of the goddess tradition for a lot of different reasons, as being a sacred place of power. And in the biblical stories, it said that she was like consorting with demons and stuff there. So I've talked about before in some of my master classes that I feel like the patriarchy is just the biggest narcissist. And it's like, if you think about a narcissist, or even just like an ex-partner or something that like you did wrong, or they did you wrong, and you just like point fingers at them, or, you know, it's like, oh, they're a piece of shit because they did this. It's sort of like that. Like she went against what they wanted of her, so they start calling names and like fabricating all these parts of her story. So there's all these other stipulations related to that, but basically then Eve is created of Adam's rib, because God's like, okay, well, Adam now needs a wife, so we're gonna create Eve from his rib. And they're in the Garden of Eden and they're happy and whatever. And, you know, then there's the tree of knowledge and the serpent. And so the serpent is said to be Lilith. The serpent is said to be Lilith. But the snake is extremely sacred in the goddess tradition. The snake is sacred in just feminine tradition in general. The snake is wise. The snake does have aspects that are dark and like slimy and scary and sneaky. But the snake is also the alchemist of transformation. The snake sheds its skin and is reborn anew. So it has both of those aspects to it, just like we all do. And so Lilith is said then to, you know, seduce Eve into eating of the apple of the tree of knowledge. And then Eve gets cast out, and like all of women forever are cursed because of Eve's choice, and they're both sent off into the patriarchy and blah blah blah. So Lilith, that's the story of Lilith, and I'll probably do a deeper dive into that because I think that there's a lot in the story of Adam and Eve, and I want to have those specific details for you available. But I want to talk now just about Lilith and how we can work with her archetype, as well as working with the archetype of Eve. So Lilith is a dark feminine energy, and she's been demonized, and basically all aspects, all feminine energies, I want to say this in the right way, All feminine energies are basically called demons that the church cannot control, or that man cannot control. Like, you have to understand 2,000 years ago, like, women were seen as nothing. We had no rights. But that's not how things always were. Things were very different. Basically, the masculine and feminine role today was swapped. Except I don't feel that there was as much like violence, and I think it was much more even. But women were really seen as nothing. There was no rights whatsoever. And with the Christian church taking power, you can see in the Bible how things are written about women. Like, women are to be subservient. Women are to listen to their husbands. They aren't supposed to talk or contribute in conversation. We're just supposed to be silent and sit still and shut up and don't say anything, because our only purpose is to birth children, and even that is a sin in itself. When you learn about like what marriage was seen as, and basically it was like you were only to have sex if it was for the purpose of a child, and otherwise it was a sin, and like anything that came out of a woman's body was a sin. So it was a pretty gross time to be alive. And Lilith was completely cast out for thousands of years, and women didn't even know that we could call upon this archetype, and it absolutely wouldn't have been safe to. So today, just like many goddesses, she's coming back with full force, because many of us alive today are able to tap into her in a safe way. It's really just about getting over our own fear, because Lilith is going to likely bring in a very different archetype. We've been very programmed to operate like Eve. And this is something I also want to talk about, because Lilith and Eve represent opposites. They represent different poles. So Eve is like this beautiful, angelic, Christed energy. And Lilith is this like wild, sovereign, powerful, but also can be reckless, also can be destructive. But both are actually extremely important. It might be, you might think like, well, shouldn't things be more like Eve? But that's because we haven't had access to Lilith, because it has been safe to. We need both of them in unison, because what happens is when we're just operating with Eve, which we've been doing for the last 2,500 years, women are walked all over. Women are making excuses for their partners. And you see this all the time, even today. Like women breaking over, like doing 500 backflips to understand a man's perspective, or making excuses when a man probably wouldn't do that for a woman. And that's just, maybe that's not true, but a woman will like try to see every perspective before she up and leaves. And so a lot of times when we're operating with just Eve without Lilith, we'll be walked all over, we'll be taken advantage of, we will be in unsafe positions, and like, yeah, but their childhood trauma makes them beat me, you know? And it's these really just, we need Lilith. We need both of them to be in balance though, because Lilith is like, basically her archetype is that she was heartbroken by Adam. And so, and also her father for sort of casting her out even though she left, but giving her demands that she couldn't abide by in her integrity. And so she's like, she's not going to accept any man. She's not going to let anybody into her heart. She's going to be closed off, but she's going to play men. She's going to wrap them around her finger. She's going to manipulate them. But her power, those are like her darker features. Her power is in her sovereignty. It's in like, I don't need you. I won't be controlled. I will choose what I want to do for myself. I don't need your permission. And it's this powerful aspect of the feminine that we need to come back. So you can see how both of those we need together. If you're operating in just Lilith energy forever, you're going to be really bitter and resentful, and you probably won't ever like be in a meaningful relationship or open your heart to somebody, because that's not Lilith's energy. She's closed off. And if you're operating just in Eve energy, you are probably going to be really understanding and open, but you're not going to be seen by your husband in a desirable way. You're going to be walked all over. You're going to be manipulated. You're going to see the best of everybody when maybe that's dangerous for you to do so. So how do we blend the two of them? And an example you'll hear in relation to these two is like Eve is the woman that you marry and Lilith is the person you have an affair with. So we have to bring those two together because it's actually bad for both the woman and the man in these situations. And it's a job for us as women. We birth men. Obviously you birth men like a child, a son, right? But also a lot of people say like it's, men have to change. We are the ones who control that as women. First of all, women raising sons, absolutely. But also what we tolerate from men, what we allow. So if you start to bring Lilith in and if you've been in a space of holding just Eve, you're probably going to ruffle a lot of feathers. And Lilith doesn't care about that. She's just like, whatever, cool. The more feathers I ruffle, the happier I am. Let's piss some people off. That's required sometimes because also we have to break out of this like good girl mold that's just gross. It's not real. That's been so molded and conformed so that we are suitable for men or for the church going way back. That's where all of it originates from, being controllable. And Lilith's energy is like, I refuse to be submissive. I refuse to be controlled. I will not let you dominate me. I will not let you keep me subservient. And that's how women have been for a long time. And now we're in a space that it doesn't have to be that way. So we can call Lilith in. And first of all, you want to establish where are you in the range of Lilith and Eve, because these are two archetypes that are at different poles. So thinking about where are you on this scale? And sometimes we'll go through big phases of both, especially when you're starting to integrate one. So like, who do you need a touch of? And then once you learn that and you start bringing in the other archetype to balance you out, you'll find that you need different archetypes in each situation. So you'll understand when you need to be a little Lilith. And like, it's funny, I always talk about like memes that I see on these videos because they just apply so perfectly. That meme that's like a person throwing up and they're like, when I think about what I should have said, but instead I was like, nice. That's when we're like being in the Eve, when you should tell someone, please go fuck yourself. But you're like, it's okay, it's not a problem. In that moment, we can call upon Lilith, of course, like in the appropriate moments. And so it takes practice learning when to use which archetype, because we don't have very much practice with it. I would say like this is the first generation. If you're 40 or under, this is the first generation that you've really had full autonomy to do that. So asking yourself, how can you start to apply Lilith in your life? And Lilith also isn't I think that there's a big misunderstanding or misconception about Lilith, that she's just like super slutty and she'll like sleep with anybody, and because she has sexual energy, definitely more than Eve, because Eve is sort of like, if in the church, and I teach about this in other masterclasses in the Priestess Returns, women were split into Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene. Mother Mary, first of all, was not like her depiction at all. She was said to be a virgin, which meant something totally different back then. A virgin meant a sovereign woman. It didn't have anything to do with if you had sex with someone yet. So she was said to be a virgin and just like holier than thou and just so pure and like not a drop of darkness to her and like easy to control. And just like the birther of the Savior, like just perfect, pristine, crystal clean, right? There's her, so there's the mother, the Madonna, basically. And then there's the whore, who's portrayed as Mary Magdalene, who was said to be a prostitute, which also, by the way, that word back then meant a sacred devotee of the goddess, which she was. She was a high priestess. So was Mother Mary. They were both high priestesses of the goddess temples. So there was a split that occurred that separated women into either the virgin or the whore. So Mother Mary was the virgin, Mary Magdalene was the whore, Eve is the virgin, Lilith is the whore. But that's not accurate at all, right? But if you're Eve in a marriage and you're like holy and pure, your husband is not gonna probably be that attracted to you. And that's where the thing comes in of like, he's gonna go to Lilith. And you see this like virally now, even if someone's not having a physical affair, like strip clubs and porn and magazines and anywhere you look on Instagram, anywhere you look at all, where there's so much availability of Lilith energy. And that energy is pure in itself. I'm not demonizing that at all. However, as women, we can look at how can we bring both of those together instead of trying to separate into the two. So a lot of times as a woman, this could look like you're sitting there with your like turtleneck and looking at images of like somebody your husband follows who's wearing hardly nothing on their page, and you're like, what a slut. Like, how dare, and you're like having all these judgments about her. But that's just an aspect of you that you haven't opened up to yet. And also it can be the same as like, oh, well, she's such a prude. It goes both ways. So first of all, how can we like refrain from any of that and just see anything that's a trigger, especially in relation to this conversation, as like, have I owned that part of myself? Something that I teach my clients, I work with my clients is, or maybe I can't remember where I had this conversation. I'm pretty sure it was with a client, but someone was looking at an image of somebody and that was very seductive. And she was speaking poorly about this other person. And I said, would you have the confidence to post a picture like that? Just to like reroute the train of thought, because sometimes it's so easy to judge something else, but not see the gift in it. Like, oh, I actually would never feel safe posting that, or I wouldn't feel confident posting that. Not that you need to, but just looking at things from a bit of a different angle. So anyways, the world is in need of a lot of Lilith energy right now. Sorry, my phone battery is dying. The world is in need of a lot of Lilith energy. So for the most part, because like I said, we've been very programmed with Eve energy. And Eve energy is beautiful. She's open and she's vulnerable and she's surrendering to life. But there are also a lot of moments that you need to know how to protect yourself, that you need to be able to stand up when people aren't treating you in the right way. And that's where Lilith's energy really comes in. But I think the real gift, and this is something I just like love teaching about so much, is about the sovereign woman and reclaiming our sovereignty. Because I think that we're in a time period where there's a lot of reshaping going on. And like what I was talking about before, how we birth men, how we are in relationships with men and what we tolerate and what we allow creates the dating pool of men, creates how men are going to be in relationships. Because I read this post from someone a few months ago that still stuck with me. And she was like, what if as women, we just like withdrew from men for like 5 years and we just didn't offer them anything. We didn't have sex with them. We didn't go, we allowed them to really like start to shift their behavioral patterns to come to us in a different way. And she was speaking about how a lot of her experiences in dating had been like where she would be intimate with someone, then they would, ghost, or the proper respect wasn't being given to her. And a lot of people are experiencing things like this. And I've done a video about the spiritual fuckboy, or about, men seemingly not being as respecting of women in general. And it's like the ball is in their court, and I think as women, we're fucking over it. And it's like, well, so Lilith comes in like, I actually don't need any of you. I'm cool by myself. But the distorted Eve can be like, and women so often fear this, like, I don't want to be alone though, so I'll just like tolerate it. That is the problem. That's the problem, that because women are still doing that and like guilty, I I'm not pointing fingers here. Like, see how you're doing this yourself. I've absolutely done this in the past. When you hold on to something that, first of all, you know isn't right, or you know is a relationship that's dead, or you know is just not how you should be being treated, where it's not an equal, even exchange. When we stick around in those situations, it changes what's available for us as women. It just changes so much, and it allows people to act certain ways that aren't right. And so this aspect won't apply to everybody, but this is just something that feels like a message that Lilith wants to bring through, is if we're wanting to see like the generation of true kings, because everybody calls everybody a king now, it means nothing. It means nothing. If we want to see a true generation of like pharaohs, this is the word I use because it actually means something to me way more than a king does. If we're a generation birthing pharaohs, we've got to be different in our relationships. We've got to hold sovereignty as women. And also look at all the parts that we don't want to look at. Looking at our own distorted feminine. Looking at our toxic feminine energy. I'll put the video up here in one of these two corners. I have a whole video on that. In a couple weeks, I have another video coming out with my friend Jacqueline where we talk about distorted feminine energy and masculine energy in relationships. I'll put that video here when it's added in a couple weeks. So Lilith's message for us is, as women, what are we sick and tired of? How can we start to apply her energy in our life more? How can we start to embody her more? Especially in your relationship, how can you balance, and in general, how can we balance even Lilith in our life? Being open and available and vulnerable and surrendered, but also like strong and powerful and fierce and uncontrollable. And for so long, women have been controlled and forced to be submissive. And that's why I talk about a lot in my Instagram stories or in master classes and stuff, that I have such a hard time reading biblical texts or things like that because the misogyny is so great. But I think sometimes what we don't understand is like how pervasive that was in culture for at least 2,000 years. That didn't really stop until the early 1900s when women started getting jobs. You know, like you think about the 1950s housewife, what do you think of? Black and white, Betty Crocker, here's your apple pie, honey, as soon as you're home, even though you just came home from your affair with your secretary at your advertising agency. Maybe that's more Mad Men. But it's that domestication and the domesticated goddess is a form of the goddess. But for so long, we haven't had a choice in how we wanted to express. The domesticated goddess is one aspect of the hearth and home, creating sacred space, cultivating sacred space. But, okay, let me just feel if there's anything else that wants to come through. Okay, so one message that I'm hearing is, if you're wanting to start embodying Lilith a little bit deeper, one place that you can start with is with your clothing, or just with something that starts to make you uncomfortable, like that gets you a little bit out of your comfort zone. So I'm hearing you'll intuitively know, like maybe there's a conversation that you need to have with somebody where you just stand your ground. Maybe you could start dressing a little differently, or like, actually, yeah, I'm dressing like my mother taught me to dress and I want to dress like myself. What feels edgy for me? What feels, just get yourself out of your comfort zone. Start to do stuff differently. And Lilith's energy is just like, fight against people who are trying to control you. Like, don't allow yourself to be controlled. But a lot of times we are controlling ourselves, keeping ourselves in these little boxes, and it's like, break out of the fucking box. Break out of it. You're the one who controls that, because now we have the key. It used to be that other people had the key, or you had the key, but you might die if you came out of the box. Like, literally. And so for so long, it's been that way. Now we have the key. So how do you want to use it? Free yourself. and look at how can I start to incorporate Lilith a little bit more in my life? Or if you are already Lilith, how can I start to open up and incorporate more of Eve's energy into my life? How can I be more open and surrendered and allow people in? Okay, I think that's enough for today. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments. I'm gonna do more videos about Lilith and Eve and the Adam and Eve creation story. I also have next week on 11/11 a new masterclass coming out. So we're talking about the descent of the goddess into the underworld, which is also called the primordial womb of the earth. And this is a regenerative space that we visit seasonally, but also in really big rebirth portals of our life. So I'm going to be teaching a class on how we can work with that energy, and also like how this space was rebranded by the church as hell, so that we wouldn't go there, so that we wouldn't visit it, so that we would be afraid, and because of that, be kept more submissive. So that's going to be on November 11th. It's next Friday at 1 p.m. I'll put the link in the comments. And if you're watching this like way later, you can still access it at the link in the comments. Usually my masterclasses are kept free, so you can go watch it there. And we're going to do a really great Akashic journey at the end of the class as well. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please leave a comment, leave your thoughts, whatever came up for you during this video. I would really love to hear how you experience this whole conversation. And of course, subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. All right, I hope that you guys have a beautiful rest of your day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.